Hello and welcome to another video. So today we are taking a look at a Chimera rune. It is a pretty generic Chimera rune. We're mainly just using this as a stopgap just to kind of fill in some content and take a look at some of the top decks at the moment other than Portal, obviously. So rune is actually being currently ranked as pretty much tier 1, just below Portal in, of course, both win rate and playability kind of ways, which isn't a big surprise. Chimera rune is still quite powerful and probably will still be quite powerful going forward, as it is just that good of a card. It'll be interesting to see what future rune cards get that may actually add more support to this kind of deck, so we're going to get right into it and check it out. And so on to our first match here is against Rune as well, so that's not a big surprise. The big thing is though, Rune has a lot of variations, which means that you never really know what you're going up against. I mean, Insight, Mysteria, Knowledge and Fate's Hand is a pretty insane draw for me, but I could be going up against an Earth Rune, a Mysteria Burn Rune, I could be going up against a straight up Chimera deck, could be going up against some kind of hybrid Despondent deck. There's just so many options, and it's really hard to know exactly what you're playing against until about turn 2 or 3 when they may start playing different cards. Also Abyss Summoner Rune, of course, don't want to forget that one. There's just so many different possibilities. We do start off extremely solid though, with the Insight into Mysteria Knowledge as our turn 1 and 2 plays. Really boosting that Fate's Hand and getting Windblast up pretty quickly. So Witch's Cauldron leads me to believe it's either an Abyss or Earth Rune. They're the two decks that tend to run Witch's Cauldron in this way, so that's not too big of a surprise. So I do just decide to favour Spell Boost since we do have a Giant Chimera in hand now, which is fairly decent. So going for the Fates, and then just kind of taking this thing out with a couple of missiles just to draw in cards and really deal with this. This is probably one of the better hands I've ever had playing Giant Chimera, as this is what you really want to be able to do, just constantly play spells on curve, get as much value out of them as possible, and really just spam them. So not a big surprise there, they obviously clear that out. And we just kind of missile it away, go for a nice owl and buff the entire board here. Or sorry, the entire hand with a nice spell boost. Giant Chimera, Snowman, Flame Destroyer, all at reasonable levels now. I can imagine that our Giant Chimera is actually quite high. Being at 11 damage on turn 5 is a fairly decent spot for a Giant Chimera to be. And Snowman is actually a decent way to buy some time, along with picking up board, which is always good. Snowman's only super weak against Haven normally, as Janine is usually a perfect clear, so it's quite a good card overall. Of course, it can also be weak to both Blood and to Dragon, but I feel like Haven tends to have a much better setup against it. So we're just taking a few pings, nothing too big of a surprise. It looks like they may be running some other form of hybrid deck here, as they are running a lot of spells. Definitely changes my mind on what they could be playing, although I do know that Abyss Summoner Rune runs a quite few spells, so there it is, Abyss Summoner, so that's not a surprise. I mean, there was still other possibilities, but I was leaning towards Abyss Summoner definitely being the top one once they started playing these Earthrights the way they were. So we kind of want to destroy these as best we can without losing too much face here, which is fairly easy. We can actually clear both of these really easily, even get 3 extra damage to face and set up our Giant Chimera, which has a fairly decent spell boost at this point, having 13. So we can actually clear something that has 3. Plus, they do have to deal with this board on top of that, so we're not actually in a bad spot at all. For everything they don't clear, it's going to be much harder for them to win. So, not a bad job at clearing so far, but looks like they've left up a couple. Did get the heal off, which means our Giant Chimera on its own won't be enough. But they did leave up the 1-3, which means we do have lethal. Perfect lethal, actually, which is great. We could have bought another turn, I think, maybe. But, I mean, why not get lethal when you can? And for our next matchup, we're up against Forest. Forest usually isn't too big of a problem. Agra Forest can be a little bit of an issue, mainly because it's just painful to have to deal with Agra Forest in most situations, but you do normally have enough support cards here to really do things, so I do decide to dump this hand as I really want something that I can spell boost, and we already have a lot of low drops, so we should be able to get more, which worked out in our favour pretty well here. Magic Missile's a fairly good one to deal with Forest, and going first definitely helps us in this situation as we are going to be ahead with this Giant Chimera. But I can't afford not to play a card, so that's why we definitely wanted to play that out. Into the Looking Glass, so it looks like we are playing up against a B&B Forest, which isn't going to be much fun because it will block out a severe chunk of Giant Chimera's damage most of the time. But hopefully it'll buy us enough time that we don't need to worry. So, Mysterious Knowledge is the obvious play here. It gives us our pretty simple Wind Blast as well, since we did get Circle over Missile, but I mean, either way I was going to be happy. Although now I kind of wish it was Missile. So we can go for the extra draw, so we've got something to spell boost here. While just slamming the magical out of face. Oh, sorry, to the 4-3, not to face. Getting a pretty solid trade-off.
On the warfield, a shining helmet.
And there's a nice comfortable Hector for their little bit of chip damage they want. But we're going to have a pretty decent Flame Destroyer now. Plus lots of ways to start spell boosting, which is always good. I also do through the Evo on the Flame Destroyer, makes it a lot harder to remove, means that they're basically forced to use something big on it, which is good for me. And Seraphic Blade is pretty much perfect. That's the kind of card that you want them to waste on something like that. Well, although I don't know if you could really call it a full-on waste. So we go for boons because we've already got our win conditions in hand. We don't need to go for any kind of long-term damage. And I went for the idol here because I know with my next draw we should be reasonably fine. So this turn really does bait out quite a decent amount of damage from our opponent that they could have had. Plus we've bought plenty of time. So I probably should have went with boons first actually instead of playing what I did, but it worked out. A Flame Destroyer, a standard owl, set up for our Giant Chimeras, which right now have a fairly good spell boost of 17 and of 15. Of course, I'm not looking forward to this Beauty and the Beast, but because they really need to deal with this Flame Destroyer, the Beauty and the Beast is going to take a severe amount of damage. So with only tanking 3 damage of my Giant Chimera, it should be enough for me to hopefully take this, as long as they don't have a way to give this double attack, which I don't believe they do right now on turn 9, they should be pretty fine. Even this second Beauty and the Beast isn't really going to be an issue, as our second Giant Chimera will have more than enough damage to win this game. Oh, the Sun and Moon though does make things close. So we can get the Giant Chimera. I mean, we lose 3, we lose 4, we lose 2, but we still have 6 left over to tank the face and win us the game. So this deck was a fair bit of fun. It did fairly well for me as well, which is always great. I do like playing Giant Chimera decks. They give me a little bit of, relaxation time to really plan out my moves and work out the funnest ways for me just to boost things out and play things, which is always great. So if you guys do enjoy that sort of playstyle, definitely recommend playing this. If you have already been playing it, give me some of your favorite kind of Giant Chimera turns that you've had, as it is a really fun card to use, even though it is pretty powerful. I would nearly say overpowered, but I mean, if you just had Giant Chimera on its own without all the extra spell boosting, it's really not that strong, so not a big surprise there. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hit the like button and subscribe. You'll find the deck list in the description below, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.